How does an archaeology degree from Auburn University turn into building the steel for self-storage facilities? We're going to figure it out. And on the subject of steel, what is pricing looking like with all the economic uncertainty and the uncertainty over tariffs? This week on Stories Behind the Door, we have partner and CEO of Storage Building Company, Patrick McAllister. Patrick McAllister, so excited to have you on the podcast. Kind of seems weird to me that I only met you a couple of months ago. And since I've met you, I just keep hearing about you from everyone else I know in the industry. It's the way this whole thing works. Just first and foremost, want to say thanks for taking some time to come and join me on Stories Behind the Door.
Yes, thanks for having me.
Listen, I always start this podcast the same way. It's called Stories Behind the Door for a reason. I love to hear the stories of how people got into self-storage. It's such a niche industry. It's such a unique industry. And it's, I think nobody ever sets out at the beginning of their life to end up here unless they were born into it. Tell me how Patrick McAllister ended up with Storage Building Company and got into this industry.
That's an interesting story. I went to school at Auburn. I actually got a degree in archaeology. And so I'm not even supposed to be doing storage. I'm supposed to be digging up dead bodies. And, once I graduated, I went to a good buddy of mine's graduation party, and his cousins owned a steel shop. And they made fun of my degree and asked what I was going to do with it. And I told them I would come and run their steel shop for them. And I started working there, just kind of doing whatever I could do. The first job I ever did was a Harry Potter ride over in Orlando, and we took over for another steel company, so we were doing a lot of T&M work, and so I was kind of learning, the industry at that point, not storage, but just steel and how it gets together and what happens when a company gets thrown off and there's a bunch of T&M work, and so that was very crazy. We actually had a church bus, and we were running 24-hour shifts, so I was running back and forth to Orlando every day from Lakeland. And then worked there for a couple of years. Then I went to pre-engineered metal building company where we did like indoor practice facilities. And I worked there for a couple of years. Then after that, and went and joined a steel shop up in Philadelphia. That's where I really learned how to kind of do project management and understand the drawings and how everything works. And then after that, I got my job back in Sarasota at the pre-engineered metal building company, and that's where I met SS20. They kind of found me through the grapevine and asked to do an interview, and he said, we understand you got a good background in steel, but have you ever done storage? And I said no, and that's kind of where my adventure started. I was working at SS20 for almost 5 years, and after that, me and my partner Tom decided to kind of break off and start our own little storage company, and we started off doing the post and beam system, and then by year 2 we got into the cold form framing systems, and ever since then we've just been building them left and right. And so so that's kind of the short. There's definitely a bunch of like crazy stories in between graduating college and where we are today, but in the short, yes, it was archaeology major to being lucky to be chosen to work for a steel company, and then after 10 years like getting into owning my own little metal building company for self-storage. So heavy background in steel since I got out of college, and then been just doing actually it's been like 20 years since I graduated. Been just doing self-storage for the past 10 years. So
I'm excited to dive in because you've been in storage in a 10-year period that's kind of run the gamut of how storage could be looked at. And I'll dig into that a little. But before I do that, I've been an entrepreneur for 25 years. It has been 25 years since the last time someone signed the front of my paycheck. And I'm always interested to understand how somebody leaves that corporate, secure position and goes and makes the choice to go start out on their own. What was it that prompted Patrick McAllister to say, hey, I'm going to go out and carve my own niche here and do this on my own?
It's a combination of everything. Obviously, every time I talked to my close friends and family and said, hey, man, I think I could do this by myself, they would say, why are you doing this? You already got a really good job. And believe me, SS20 was a great company. They paid well. It was good to work for them. So a lot of my friends were like, don't do it. You're doing fine. Even my family was kind of in that position. It was more, to be honest with you, it was more the clients. As I'm working at SS20 and talking to some of our clients, a lot of them were very surprised to find out that I did not, in fact, own that company. And so that was when I was kind of like, man, I'm really doing a lot over here. We're going to the shows. I'm also the project manager. It's set up a little bit different than my company, but estimator, project manager, salesman, going to the shows. So I don't want to say I became the face of SS20. A lot of people knew who the owner was, but there was a lot of, you know, when I finally jumped ship and said, hey, I'd like to, look at some jobs with you, but with a different, shirt on, they were like, did you sell your company? I said, no, I've started off on my own, so
Yeah.
so that was, as I was talking to some of the guys before I jumped ship, like, hey, would you buy from me? People were very surprised that I was not the owner of SS20 at that point. So that was kind of the motivation to me, was like, you know what, I think I can do this. And, being in the steel industry since graduating college, I had relationships with deck manufacturers, steel manufacturers. A lot of these guys were kind of pumping me up that if you did, in fact, go off on your own, we will give you terms. We will give you some of the same deals that you had at SS20 and some of the other steel shops that you worked with before. So I was, very, it was more of my vendors and my clients motivating me more than my friends. My friends were and family were saying, take the safe road. You got a good job. You got a young family. Don't take any risk, So it was mostly, and my partner Tom had a lot to do with help pushing, the envelope there. But no, I mean, I always wanted to own a business and always wanted to kind of do this, but it was mostly, it wasn't from motivation from my friends and family. It was mostly from my clients and vendors saying that they'll back me and they'll do it. And believe me, it was scary. I took every dollar I had. We drained my 401k, which, I was only 30 at the time, so it wasn't massive. And started the company, and we didn't get a first job till 7 months into the game. And so, there was times where me and Tom were looking at each other saying, what have we done? And believe me, SS20 didn't make it easy on us. It was
Yeah.
a lot of, some of the vendors that we worked with that the owner of SS20 had better relationships than I did, basically ghosted me, and a lot of clients ghosted me. And then there was some that helped me out, so, but it took 7 months to get our first job. And then once we got our first job, it just started kind of cannonballing, and again, we entered the market cheaper than most metal building guys, obviously, to try to drum up some work and get some business for us. But, now it's firing on all cylinders. I've created a machine, and I feel like we're becoming one of the, best in the industry. And we try to, keep that up, I guess. So,
Well, I can vouch for the people that I know that are GCs, owners reps that have worked with you, speak extremely highly of you. Listen, we've had this discussion ourselves that there's a couple people in the industry that do steel that, you've told me this yourself, right? If you lose a bid to them and it's close, you're like, great, they're going to take care of you. On the flip side, I'll say the reputation that you've carved out for yourself is pretty phenomenal. I want to dive into that a little bit because you said something to me that kind of clicked in my business development head, which is technically my title. When you were working for SS20, you had these vendors that you worked with that had a relationship with you where they were like, hey, we'll support you if you go out on your own. What does Patrick McAllister attribute that development of that type of a relationship with people to? How do you create that kind of relationship with people? And quite frankly, I'll say you have that relationship. I was just talking to Martin Blum from EDC this morning, and he's speaking very highly of the relationship we have with you. How do you create those kind of relationships?
well, in short, I'm just a really cool guy. But I would say
maybe the best answer I've ever had on this podcast.
It's all about honesty and being fair. That's the way. So right off the bat, and I'm not even going to name names, but the first company I ever worked for right out of college, it was a steel shop in Lakeland. They were the biggest, mean guys in the world. Like I don't want to drop the A-bomb on them, but like it was just, working with these guys, as soon as you got a steel company on the job site, you owed them money. You owed them change orders. If they were looking for opportunities to swindle more money out of these contracts. And I always, even when I was speaking with my old owner, and that's why I didn't last there too long, I was like, hey, we can work with these guys. There's, we don't always have to be this stout, like this very mean steel fabricating shop to where, we're difficult to deal with. As soon as you get the job, we take advantage, stuff like that. Like you can always work through all these issues. And so, when I was going to create a company, even before storage, like I remember talking to Tom back in the day, I'm like, man, we could start our own steel company and we can just be the nice guys of the industry, like I always say, construction's never going to be perfect. It isn't. 100% of the time, there's always going to be problems. It's how you deal with them. And I think that's what helps my company do is, we will answer the phone. And I will tell every single client, I am never going to be perfect. You're never going to say, hey, I can put SBC on the job and then I can close my eyes and then a year from now, we're going to have this beautifully built storage facility without one phone call. Like there's going to be problems, but I can tell you the second there is an issue, my company will pick up the phone. We will get guys to that job site. We'll make the corrections. We'll get everything done that you need to do. We don't hide from our mistakes. I don't say, someone says, hey, this doesn't look right. I'm not sitting here saying, well, how can I pin this on the general contractor and spin this to where he told us to make it not look right? To me, it's like, okay, you're right. My guys did put that up. Let me order a new panel or let me get a new piece of steel out there and then let's put it up the correct way and then, get caught back up on the schedule. And that's all these GCs want to know. I mean, this is what these owners want to know is that, listen, we all got a budget. We all got a schedule. I could sit there and say, okay, that panel's not looking right because some other trade before me put in the wall differently and popped my panel out weird. Believe me, the GC doesn't want to know that. Like, they just want to know, like, can you get it fixed and get it fixed quickly?
Yeah.
And without charging me for it. To me, when you hire SBC, you're hiring, 30% of your projects. So more than likely, my guys can fix it. We do have a lot of guys on the job site. And so there's definitely contractors where we've gotten phone calls and said, hey, my carpenter's not on the job site today and I needed to install the machine that blows your hands in the bathrooms. Can you send me guys? And I'm like, yeah. And in the end, my guy probably put that in 15 minutes. What do I charge him for that? Yeah. Some guys would say that's a $2,000 change order. I'm like, dude, it was 15 minutes. The guy did it on a smoke break. So I mean, like, there's nothing to charge there. But then to me, that my GC's like, man, I can really call Patrick and ask him to put in, handrails for the handicap bathroom, and he'll do it. And it's probably not going to cost me anything because he's already got 15 men on the job site framing up and doing door and hallway stuff. So, I mean, not that I want to give away free work, but I'm not in the business nickel and diamond. I'm always thinking about, who's my next client? Is he having a good experience with us? And does he want to come work with me again? And to me, if he signs me up again for the next job, then we're doing an excellent job. People want to work with people they like. So
I think my head immediately went to bid leveling, right? Like when we're bid leveling a job and I'm looking at one contractor versus the other. And listen, for me on my projects, I'm looking at it at steel level. Yeah, we're going to hire a GC and the GC is going to do stuff, but we're doing so much work, especially in storage, that we're going to have relationships directly with a steel guy. To your point about nickel and diming and $2,000 change orders, like those are things that we know when we're looking at who are we going to choose to go do the next job with, right? We know who's the guy I can call up and say, hey, so I'm fascinated by the fact that you're very aware of the value of that long term, right? Because quite frankly, you don't want to work with the guy who's going to choose the lowest bidder every single time. That's not your ideal client to go work for over and over again.
No, and I tell my whole estimating staff, obviously, we always want to be competitive. We always want to be in the race when there's a bid. But, typically if I hear your low bid, that to me somewhat scares me sometimes because I'm like, that's rare that I hear that. We definitely have always been, hey, you're competitive. I do hear a lot of the times like, hey, SBC is in this group of people, but then there's this one outlier, one or two companies that are, especially now in this market, who are significantly cheaper than the group. Those are risks that you're going to take. And again, I was there. When we started Storage Building Company, probably people looked at me and said, this guy is significantly cheaper than the group. And then I had GC say, screw it, we're going to roll the dice and hopefully SBC doesn't screw up. And believe me, we did. But we stood by our work. I mean, that was the thing. Like there was multiple times where I'm sitting here sweating. I'm like, oh my God, we've taken this job too low. This is not going to be the margins. If I have one mistake, I'm going to be screwed. Of course, that one mistake did happen. And then I'm just like, you know what? And I remember looking at Tom and I'm like, we're just gonna have to sell more work. I can't send them a back charge. Like we're too new. They're gonna hate me if I start nickel and diming them. And we missed that. I was like, listen, let's just finish this job. Let me go win some other work and we'll figure out a way, to try to get some money back or make us profitable again. And that's what I would say to any entrepreneur getting out there. Like, you're never going to do one job that's going to retire you. This is a business all about relationships. Like, if you're thinking you're going to get on one job and make $1 million and be done with it, then you're in the wrong business. This is a gradual, relationship thing. We wanted to come in and do 1 or 2 projects a year. That'd be great, but I couldn't do that either. We put out too many bids. We put out too many opportunities for us to win. We started getting some momentum, and we, had to just start building them. And so another thing we also did was we dedicated a lot of our, winnings and our overhead and money that we were getting on the job into production. I didn't go out and buy a yacht and a jet and make things like really awesome. Like what I did was I hired a massive staff. There's over 60 employees now that work at SBC. And my thought was, I can't sit here and say we're the best and go get all this work and then just have me and Tom run the show. So we had to invest all of our money in the first 3 years into people and process and procedure and to make ourselves better. And that's why I'm always, my slug line is true. Like, we're trying to perfect the storage building experience. In the industry, when I saw that there was this hole where all the metal building guys were providing the same product and not picking up the phone and driving general contractors nuts. I was like, I'll probably still drive these GCs nuts, but at least I'll pick up the phone and I'll let them yell at me and I'll tell them we'll correct it, and then we'll get out there immediately and get it fixed. And once GCs saw that, hey, we have someone to communicate with, we have someone who can hear our complaints and process, then, and now Patrick will pick up tomorrow if he still hasn't fixed it, and he'll pick up the next day until he does fix it. And so, that's kind of our thing, is that we stand by our work and we're going to be there. But give me a couple more years, maybe I will have it perfected and you'll never have to complain to me again. So
a couple things that I immediately wanted to ask as I'm listening. I want to get into the stress piece of this because I think it's something that people don't really understand very well, and I'm interested to get your take on it. Before I go into the stress, you know what? We're going to go into the stress side because I forget the other question I was going to ask, which will come to me as we go. You're dealing with multi-million-dollar bids. Like one small self-storage project, you're going to have $1.5 million, $2 million of steel at a minimum. How does Patrick McAllister deal? Because you talked about that. You're not getting one job where you make $1 million and you retire. On the flip side, you're running the risk of losing hundreds of thousands of dollars on a job every single time you go out and bid something. How do you cope with that level of stress?
I don't know. That's I'm a very kind of mild guy. I think everyone's got different personalities and they would take it all a different way. Believe me, some of my, there's 3 partners that run the show here. My other 2 partners probably are higher stress than me when it comes to stuff like that. But I would say, for me, coping with it, it's all about personnel. I mean, I'm very confident in my people, and I'm very confident in our training program and our estimating, the way we do stuff. When I'm bidding a $2 million job, the numbers that we're putting together. I mean, one thing, and this is how I would say I always had success. It's not me putting up this building. It's subcontractors. We also work with a whole network of steel shops, and so we vet them. We run the company a lot like a general contractor. So if I get 5 steel bids for a certain job, we're going over all 5 of those bids. We're vetting every single one of them, and so by the time my bid's in there, I'm extremely confident that everything's covered. And then, of course, I have a team that's scouring through it the same way. And then I know once we get a job, I have a network of detailers and a whole team in my office that's sitting there going through the drawings, making sure our scope's correct. And yeah, I mean, there's a lot of risk. And like I said, it's not perfect. We've screwed up and we've, lost money on these jobs. But I would say, what keeps the stress off is I'm extremely confident in our team and their ability to perform and not, have millions of dollars in mistakes. And I can tell you, the first couple of years, when we had a small team, it was me and Tom, and we were making those mistakes, and the stress was you could see it on my shoulder, man. I was not in good spots, But the more we hired, the more we invested in the company and hired competent guys that can do and answer to these GCs and go over stuff. The more confidence we had to go and chase more work and more complex jobs and more expensive jobs and take on more scope. And I'm still very confident in our ability to do it. But yeah, I would say more of the stress comes from, and I talked about this in my last podcast, is the financing side. Money makes the world go around, and in construction, we all sign contracts that everyone's going to pay us in 30 days. And that That has never happened. And, there's guys that pay 31, 35 days, but I'd say your average is going to be in that 50 to 60, some guys even 90. And, in the early years, that was the stress, is how come I got to be the guy to go to the bank, pull out a loan to fund this man's job? And he's a billionaire REIT, and he can't figure out a way to pay us every 30 days. Well, that was the industry, and that was the way it went back at the Harry Potter ride. No one paid that way.
Yeah.
And so,
That's
that to me is probably the more stressful thing is knowing, you got to think, if I start a job on January 1, my billing's due by January 30th, then that owner has another 30 days to pay me. So his billing is due to the GC, he's going to pay me March 1. If I start on January 1 and on a 3-story, we're almost ready to start putting up the roof come March 1st. So I've laid out material and labor for 2 full floors before I get paid for the first floor.
Yes.
And that's a lot. I mean, I feel like that, that's a very good example of, hey, that cheap guy, he may be $200,000 less than the rest of the pack, but is he only 6 months old, and does he have the ability to build 2 floors of storage without his hand out?
Yeah.
And, back in the day, we didn't. We went to credit lines. And I also, because we were new and I was trying to be the nice guy, I didn't want to sit there and call my clients and say, we're pulling our guys if I don't get paid. That's not the way the industry works. No one will ever hire me again. So I was like going to Tom, get us a loan so I can pay our men and our material, and then we'll hope for our first January check and by the middle of March. So that was the stressful side. And that was the part, when me and Tom are looking and saying, man, we may have gotten in the wrong industry because we needed millions of dollars to start this business, not $100,000 cash. So, but we figured it out.
I love the fact
it was
that
definitely stressful.
That line, you figured it out, right? Like, good thing. It's one of those things. I say this sometimes, like, there's things I've done in my life I'm glad I didn't know what it was going to look like before I chose to go do it, right? Because I probably wouldn't have done it in hindsight. I want to ask a question that I meant to ask earlier and I kind of slipped my mind, but your conversation brought it back up again, which is, it's very hard for somebody not in our industry to understand what a development looks like, because you're going to have a developer, whether that's a REIT, it's an independent PE person, it's a small guy, whatever that may look like. You're going to have a GC, you're going to have a steel guy, you're going to have a bunch of other subs. Sometimes you might have, I met you through Dan Whitney, who acts as an owner's rep, right? So he's like a buffer between the developer and the GC. There's so many layers in a single project, because you're talking about $15, $20 million projects in many cases, sometimes more than that, depending on the market you're in. How does Patrick McAllister and your partners, Kenny and Tom and Storage Building Company, how do you navigate who you're going to work with, right? How do you kind of say, hey, listen, we know that you brought it up, right? Like, in certain instances, if I'm working with certain GCs and certain developers, it might be more of a pain in the ass than it's going to be worth. How do you kind of make those decisions from a business level on who you're going to choose to work with long term?
So, and I would assume if you talk to all 3 partners, we'd have a different answer for all of this. I kind of have a rule of thumb, like, I think everyone's a good guy until you prove that you're not a good guy. And so, every GC, every developer, and everyone who wants to work with SBC, as long as, you present yourself as a decent company and you try and you're going to try to do best by the contract and what we're agreeing to, then you got a shot. But there's definitely, like, I'll be honest with you, there's probably 2 or 3 people right now that are on the SBC no bid list. And these are guys who we've worked with, and the projects, again, like I said, some projects are just not going to go smooth, but even the most unsmooth job, there's builders that still build with us. But if you take advantage of us, or in my opinion, these were all retainage based, where the owner got paid retainage and he refused to pay us because of whatever circumstance. Those guys I'll never work with again. And that was the thing. Like, we've probably built, I don't know, 300 plus projects since we've been in business. And I would say I've only not been paid retainage on 2. But those 2 projects actually paid retainage to the general contractor. He refused to pay me because he didn't make money. And those guys are no longer, we will never work with them again. And so, and that's what I was trying to say, like, have them call, work a deal with me or whatever. But that, like, that was the way I kind of look at it is, I'll give everyone a chance and I'll choose to work with anybody as long as, they're good guys, but the second you show like your true cards or whatever's going on, like, that's kind of where it is. Like, I never go in and say, I think this guy's going to be a snake, I don't want to work with him. I'll give him a shot. And if it turns into a snake, then, we learn our lesson, so, but then I would say, my partners like Tom would probably say, hey, I'd prefer to work with guys who'd pay closest to 30 days no matter what. And then, Kenny would say, I'd prefer to work with GCs who have A teams that make our jobs easier, and I would say, I just want to work with everybody as long as they're fair with us, so, and again, I know these GCs, like, when they're working with one owner is going to pay us every 35 days. Another owner says, hey, we're going to pay every 65 days, so that GC's not bad to me. It's just, he's choosing to choose an owner as well. And some of these owners that pay later, we want to work with them because they got big portfolios. They got a lot of work. And so it's just literally trying to figure out a way to make it work for us.
The things that people who don't own businesses maybe don't understand about the decision-making process and the juggling that you're doing when you're handling it. All right, 2 more topics I want to cover before we wrap this up. The first one is 2015 to 2025. Storage is looking different in 2025 than it looked in 2015, right? 2015 kind of led into that massive period of 17, 18, 19 where, you had the most developments ever coming online. I'm interested with your seat of how you see the differences from 15 to 25 and maybe what you're seeing for the next couple of years, whether you think we might have a slowdown in storage development or do we think we're going to keep plugging along?
It's tough. I would say yes. In the very beginning, interest rates were, I had a developer once say the money was free back then. Back when interest rates were in that 3% or less or whatever, that was free money. Now the interest rates have came up, so it's no longer free. It's double the price. And so, it was funny when I first started in storage, working at that first company. We started getting a lot of momentum. There was a lot of developments. It felt like storage became very popular. And then when I started SBC, there was a lot of new guys, a lot of new, owners and developers joining the game. And then interest rates went to, they doubled. And then a lot of those owners were like, oh, this sucks. Storage was not what we thought it was. And then a lot of the old school guys were like, this is part of the cycle. I would say to me, storage building company, when I felt as if we were getting slow, and that was kind of not like slow, but just the bids weren't coming in like they were. And again, when we first started, we were mostly an East Coast predominant company, mostly in Jersey, New York, and Pennsylvania. My thought was, hey, we have to come up with a way, because storage is all like, still it's not, there's still tons more to be built in America. And so if I'm going to sit here and say, hey, I work in Florida, Jersey, and Pennsylvania, we're going to run out of work. And those markets kind of dried up a little bit, and they will. Right now, they're actually popping back off again. And so what we decided to do is say, hey, let's go west. So we opened up our shop and out in Salt Lake City area. And at this point now, we probably gained, in our first year out there, about 20 million in new contracts, but we were probably 20 million in contracts on the East Coast down. So we didn't really see a slowdown for storage building company, definitely a slowdown on the East Coast, but now a pickup on the West Coast that helped offset that 20 that we lost. And so, so to me, I guess to answer that question short, I think storage is still great. I just got back from a little storage summit in Atlanta, and that market's hot. A lot of the speakers were saying a lot of the same thing, that, obviously it's a little bit of slow and it's just due to interest rates and people moving around, but there is still people moving around. And as long as that's happening, I think you're going to see, storage still do well. I always judge it on what we got going on. And right now we are now setting up like project 375 to bid in our bid file. So we're just under 400 bids and we're halfway through the year. Last year we bid over 600 projects. So wow. As far as I'm concerned, storage is alive and well, and our numbers that we're now moving into year 3 of these very good numbers that my company's been seeing as far as, projects awarded. And so, there has been no slowdown. For me, a slowdown would have been bidding 600 and only bidding 150 to date so far. Now, again, what's helping us get all these bid opportunities is now we're nationwide. And so we hell, I've bid probably 12 jobs in Hawaii this year, and as of a year and a half ago, never bid one in Hawaii. So,
Yeah.
it's, and which, by the way, if you ever have a chance to build in Hawaii, I definitely recommend it. That's a beautiful,
I'm searching all the
beautiful
time.
job. Yes. So.
Tough to go do a site visit.
Yeah, well, I did a site visit, and of course, when you land in Hawaii, it's beautiful. It doesn't even look like America. And I was
It's
thinking
different.
that I wasn't paying attention. I took our contractor, which is a local Hawaiian GC, out and took him out to a steak dinner my first night there. And I stood up and I was like, guys, I just want to let you know, you guys have a beautiful country. And then the guy looks at me, he's like, we're in the same country, you idiot. And I was like, yes, you're right. You're right. But it does feel like a whole separate world out there. I'm,
Uh,
6 hours behind the rest of the world, and and it doesn't look like anything in America. So yeah, I
that's
kind of felt,
great. That's really
dumb after
funny.
that. But
Why
no,
do so
you get
many
a chance.
people like Patrick McAllister? That story tells exactly why so many people like Patrick McAllister.
Oh, and it was
That's
so funny
great.
because I thought I was like slick. I'm doing a cheers. I'm like, thank you for inviting me to this beautiful country, and they're just looking at me like, what is this guy talking
I
about?
love it.
So,
Listen, I want to get one more question in. I try and honor a half hour, and you've been with me for longer than a half hour now, so I appreciate we've kind of gone over a little bit. I promised people we were going to talk about steel prices. It's been such a crazy year with tariffs. I had jobs that I was working on where we had a 30% increase in our prospective budget just based on tariffs. I'd love to get an up-to-date take for you. We're taping this on June 26, 2025. What's going on with steel prices? Have we started to see a little bit more clarity on what's going to happen longer term? I would love to pick your brain given how into it you are.
so steel prices are on the rise. I would say definitely. December was the lowest we got. January there was talks of obviously the new president coming in and what he was going to do, because he talked about, hey, I'm going to bring manufacturing back in America, and so these tariffs did stuff. But one thing we all need to keep in mind here is the steel business is a business, and they're in it to make money. And um, also in America, anywhere, I would say almost 80 to 85% of American steel manufacturers and fabricators buy their steel in America. So with them tariffing, whatever Asian markets and other countries that we were hearing, that shouldn't affect us the way it did. But like I said, it's all about rhetoric, and it's all about what the industry can do. If you're Trump and you tell everyone, hey, we're gonna put tariffs on and to try to bring American manufacturing back, if I'm a mill, then I'm like, hey, this is our opportunity to slide price increases in. And they did. Did they really get hit with price increases? No, because we buy a lot of material here. And so I think you're seeing opportunities from our bigger guys like Nucor, Steel Dynamics, and stuff, taking the opportunity because the rhetoric says, hey, it's going to be more expensive, so let's go ahead and do it. Then what happens is developers are like, well, screw this, I want to wait. And so when that happens, now we're like, oh shit, that didn't work. They're not buying the steel. So the
Yeah.
trick after that is hey, the steel mills are still going to raise their price. Now my steel fabricators are not selling work. And so what gets hurt? The labor and the margins. And so, as much as we heard of steel pricing going up and I got new price sheets, the second, a developer would say, well, hey man, your price in December was 2 million. Now you're at 2.1. Can you come back to 2 million? I'd start calling the guys and say, guys, can we do this? Can we do this? Next thing you know, hey, go ahead and sign the deal. We'll do it. So, did steel rise? Yes. Are people holding it? No. And then there's even been more recent talks about a new increase. And we've actually, over the past 30 days, have gotten steel price increasing. But then there's still some smaller shops right now that are calling me saying, our pricing's still good. Our pricing's still good. Of course, that's the beauty in working with a company like Storage Building Company and some of my competitors. We produce very little as far as materials. We work with a bunch of manufacturers that do that. I mean, you're hiring a guy right now. If you were to hire my company, we are not just going to go to one steel guy and he's going to say, hey, this is your price. If that happens and it's not good, now you're paying my crew to go around and find a guy who can obviously produce this for us at the right time and correctly, but at the price that someone wants. And that's what you're paying me to do. And so, we're working with a lot of our partners. We're trying not to see pricing go up. And it is, but I would say in the end, when it comes to buying time, you're going to see these guys go back to where you want them to do. And so, it's not sticking. I think everyone still remembers the COVID days and the first round of Trump tariffs and his first, terms when he was president back then. steel was wild then. And then tariffs, or not the tariffs, but the COVID, no one could hold their price more than 24 hours. And so, guys, and I'll announce it to all of LinkedIn and everybody, that's not happening now. Like, when we're talking steel price increases, like I just got one from our light gauge guy last Friday. It's a 6% increase. And most owners are going to say, Patrick, you're eating that, and that's how it's going to go. So, so unfortunately, that's the business. Once you increase steel, then the work stops. Now, in order to get the pricing back where you're going to see that go into labor, and people are going to get you back down to the price because the work's not there anymore. I wish there was this perfect world where the price increase went and then owners just decided to pay it, but it doesn't happen. The owners are not going to pay it, and they're going to refuse to build, which then is going to cause the labor market to loosen up their price, and then in the end, the developer still wins and they get what they want.
The wonderful cycle of capitalism, right?
It is.
I love it. Listen, I've had such a blast hanging out with you. Cannot thank you enough for being so forthright with your answers. I'm giving so much amazing information to anyone who's watching live. This will also air on YouTube and Apple and Spotify starting next Wednesday. Somebody wants to get a hold of Patrick McAllister and doesn't know Storage Building Company yet, hasn't been able to use you guys. What's the best way to get a hold of you and talk doing storage projects?
All the storage guys are on LinkedIn. I'm on LinkedIn. We're extremely active. You can DM me on there. You can call me on my cell phone, 941-374-3084. And then, of course, if you go to our website, which is storagebuildingcompany.com, if you go to contact us, you'll see email addresses there. You'll also see our regular house line. So you can get in touch with me anytime. I'm always doing storage. Call me 24/7. We'll talk about it. We'll get you guys locked in on pricing and get you guys under construction.
I'm not letting out the secret that you might get involved in a little small bay flex too. I'm going to keep that under wraps. So listen, I want to thank you. I didn't tell this story at the beginning, but I crashed your dinner out at ISS in Vegas, and you were so kind to let me come and hang out with you. I showed up with Dan Whitney on his invite, and you and Tom, man, I have nothing but amazing things to say. I have since had a chance to spend a lot more time with you, and listen, excited to have made that connection and excited to see what you guys are doing in the industry, and want to finish just by again saying thanks so much for agreeing to come spend some time with me.
No, thanks for having me. And anyone's welcome to our little dinners and stuff. And even coming up in September, we're doing another little golf outing. So I hope to see everyone there in the LinkedIn world. Let's come on.
Look, is that in Vegas at SSA?
It will be. We're doing something similar to what we did last time. We're gonna host a night golf networking event. So you don't have, and I'm telling you right now, you don't have to be good at golf. Just show up and meet, probably 50 to 70 other storage guys.
Love it. Having golf with you before, I can vouch that my terrible golf game was accepted. So I can speak for that very, very well, that you don't have to be able to be good at golf to go hang out with Patrick McAllister and have a great time. Appreciate you, my friend. I'm going to wrap things up. That's it for this edition of Stories Behind the Door. Please hit the subscribe button on the YouTube channel. And again, Patrick McAllister, I want to say thank you so much for hanging out.
All right. Thank you.
Appreciate it, brother.
See you, man.